He opened the door without warning and stopped, coat half on and briefcase in hand. The house smelled of lemon polish and fresh coffee, ordinary things that felt out of place tonight. From the study came a low murmur and the soft scrape of a cloth on wood. He had called ahead for a dozen different reasons in a dozen different cities. Surprise visits weren't part of his life. Yet here he was, watching a scene that refused to belong to the headlines he ruled. The family maid kneeling beside his father, tucking a blanket around the old man's shoulders with careful hands. She looked up as his boots creaked across the floor. Younger than he'd expected, steady-eyed and practical, she stood without ceremony. He had seen her before, efficient, quiet, part of the household machinery. Tonight she was something else, a presence that held the fragile pieces together. His father, always a pillar in photographs, looked small under the study lamp. His skin was thin paper. His fingers trembled around a mug. He smiled when he saw his son as if surprised by a memory. "You're home," he said. "I didn't expect you," the son answered. He set the briefcase down and felt foolish for being surprised. He asked the nurses standard questions about doctors and pills and appointments. The maid, Lena, he learned, answered calmly. Dr. Halperin had been by. They were monitoring the cough, the lapses of memory. The billionaire listened carefully and then sat because the room demanded it. There was something in the way Lena smoothed the blanket that made him remember trivialities he had replaced with spreadsheets. The docks where he had been taken as a child, the smell of salt, a small man's advice about pride. Lena moved like someone who had learned to be kind in hardship. She hummed softly as she worked. When his father reached for her hand, she did not pull away. His sister arrived a few minutes later, silk and authority in motion. She took in the study like a manager auditing a project, then fixed her gaze on Lena with thin disapproval. "You should be upstairs," she said, voice clipped. There was a tension between her and his absent presence, a ledger he had not understood until now. Over the following weeks he found himself coming back. Not for the empire that demanded his attention, but for the library where small human things happened. Lena bathed his father in patience. She brought simplicity to memory-lost conversations. Photographs, stories, gentle corrections. The billionaire, used to buying solutions, felt a new, uneasy debt to the woman who asked for nothing beyond the dignity to do her work. His sister, practical to a fault, began to argue about selling part of the estate to fund private care. "This is an asset," she said coldly. He pushed back. "Sometimes houses are homes," he said, and realized the sentence had weight he had hidden from himself. Then the letter appeared. A cousin's claim, a note written in his father's shaky but unmistakable hand. It was addressed to whomever cares for me when I cannot care for myself. The letter named Lena in plain language, asking that a modest provision be made to keep small mercies alive. If ever there is a choice between headlines and humanity, it read, choose the latter. When he read it, he understood two things. His father had always had a private account of kindness, and the currency of that account was not public praise. The sister called the letter a forgery. Legal threats obliterated family niceties. The household became a battlefield over paper and principle. Lena endured scrutiny without spectacle. She accepted the modest payment and used it as she had planned, to secure a rooming house for her brother, to repair the roof over their small rented flat, to put a worn apprenticeship textbook into his hands. He visited once, brought a box of tools that had been polished and labeled, and watched the boy learn to plane wood with a reverence that surprised him. Sometimes the billionaire wondered whether his father's letter had been a final act of contrition. He imagined the note being written at a midnight table, hands shaking but determined to right small wrongs without spectacle. The thought made him both furious and grateful. Furious because his father had kept it a secret so long, grateful because the secret had set something right before it was too late. He began to keep a different ledger, names, small needs, promises he had not known how to make. He set up a fund to help apprentices buy tools and arranged scholarships at the vocational center by the harbor where Lena's brother trained. At first decisions felt awkward, then they became habit. The sister hired lawyers who sent stern letters. They accused Lena of manipulation and threatened to auction part of the estate. Meetings that once dealt with quarterly projections became moral hearings. He sat through them feeling both foolish and resolute. He decided again and again that some things were not for sale. Lena handled the scrutiny as if it were another interruption to the work she already had to do. She used the modest provision to repair a roof, to rent a small cottage by the water, to buy books and tools for her brother. He visited once with a box of polished tools. Watching the apprentice learn to plane wood was a private satisfaction that could not be measured in annual reports. The letter from his father became a lens through which he reinterpreted years of small silences. He imagined the old man writing at night, choosing words that would favor humanity over headline. The thought made him both angry that it had been kept secret and grateful that it existed at all. The legal dispute faded under the weight of handwriting and witness. The courts upheld the father's wishes. The sister left the estate with sharp words and fewer friends. Years later she called, softer, asking after an aunt. They never staged a reconciliation. When his father's health collapsed for good, Lena was there through nights lit by a single lamp. The billionaire learned to stop rescuing and start being present. He brewed tea, fetched medicines, read from old newspapers, and learned to accept silence as its own presence. Once, when a confused fear made the old man insist on finding a lost watch, the son removed his own and placed it in his father's palm. "Keep it," he said, and the old man's smile was a small, fierce thing. At the graveside, the billionaire stood beside Lena with a new sense of what an heir owed. He was no longer merely an inheritor of assets but a steward of obligations that could not be itemized. He visited the docks afterward and watched apprentices practice knots, their hands learning a craft that made dignity tangible. He funded a partnership between the company and local workshops. It was modest and precise, like the axe that had shifted him. Time took grief and trimmed it into memory. He kept a few trivial rituals: a cup of lemon tea at dawn, a photograph placed among others, the occasional afternoon reading aloud to an old man who had been a titan in public but a child in his last years. Lena's brother finished his apprenticeship, found work at a shipyard, and sent occasional postcards with proud, clumsy sentences. In boardrooms he still negotiated and fought for market share. In private he spoke differently about success. He started conversations about responsibility and quietly redirected donations toward trades and schooling. Reporters called it a change of tone. To him it was simply a new set of priorities. Lena never wanted monuments. Her reward was practical: a secure home, a brother with work, and the quiet knowledge that someone kept the small vows her employer had entrusted to paper. The billionaire realized that money could open doors but not teach humility. She had taught him that lesson plainly by doing what needed doing. Years later, when asked about legacy, he talked about apprenticeships and tools rather than towers. The empire remained, but his measure of it widened. He still loved strategy and ambition. He had only learned to place them beside something smaller and more durable: the unadvertised acts that keep a community breathing. On ordinary afternoons, when light slanted through tall windows and the house smelled of lemon polish, he would sit and remember the soft scrape of a cloth on wood and the gentle nod of a blanket. The memory made him smile. Small things often mattered most.